stress appraisal connection. Stress to us is going to feel like anything that feels overwhelming. And when we feel overwhelmed, oftentimes we appraise the situation in one of 5 ways. So the appraisals are basically, you can think of an appraisal as the theme of the story that's going to start in your head related to what's happening. Okay? So here's a list of appraisals that come when a person's feeling really stressed out. The first one is called a loss appraisal, and a loss appraisal will happen when something precious to us is lost. So it can be death in the family, the ending of a love relationship. You lose a job that was important to you, your health. All of us, we can imagine losses in our lives. Now, when a loss arises, especially if it's deeply personal, we're going to feel sad. Sadness comes with a loss appraisal. Good? All right, now the next one is a threat appraisal, and there's 2 kinds of threat. Threat 1 is sort of an acute threat, where if you're standing in line at the bank and somebody runs in and they've got a black hood over their face and they say, "Stick 'em up," that's threat 1. If you're sitting in your car idling at a red light and you hear screeching tires behind you, that's threat 1. And when a situation is acutely threatening, that's when fear naturally arises in us. And these emotions, I just want you to know, they're co-arising. The stimulus, the sound of the screeching tires or the sight of the gun, causes the emotion to co-arise. It's not like you think about it. It's not a choice. It's, in a sense, it's self-made by your network. The meaning is made by your network. Okay, now nervous systems can make themselves more nervous. That happens, that's sensitization, but that's later in this process. Okay, so the next one is called threat 2. Now this one is slightly different than threat 1. It's not an acute threat, it's more like a chronic threat, and most of us can relate to this. Feeling like we're doing too much, working too hard, not getting enough sleep, not getting the right nutrition, exercise, we're not in the right relationship or job. And when the situation in our life is not right for a long period of time and we feel the intensity of the emotion of longing for things to be different, maybe our health isn't good, we can feel overwhelmed. And so threat 2, sense of distress or overwhelm, that's going to produce a lot of cortisol and adrenaline in your body. And that biochemical shift is going to be in large, high concentrations over a long period of time, toxic to us, toxic to the brain, nervous system, the endocrine system, hormones get out of whack. All right, so living emotionally thin for a long period of time, not good. So the next one is called an inadequacy appraisal. Now you guys know that I work at Sierra Tucson. So at Sierra Tucson, I would say that 100% of the patients there are feeling in some way, shape, or form that they don't feel good about themselves. Like something's wrong with me. You understand? Making it to rehab, you can feel a lot of shame and guilt for being in rehab. Now, for us, in the normal population, typically the number isn't quite so high. It's more like 99%. But what I want you to know is that we live with this too. And we live with it because a lot of times, and I don't want you to think I'm blaming parents, because these dysfunctions get passed down through generations, all right? Nobody's teaching parenting. And, but our parents oftentimes, the household is dysfunctional, they talk to their children with like, what's wrong with you? And then the child hears that and wonders, like, what's wrong with me? Or they go to school and children are teased mercilessly or bullied. Or just the fact that our advertisers, marketing people on radio, TV, and billboards every single day, thousands of messages about how we're not okay. And that voice that tells you, that compares you to others and you show up unfavorably, that voice actually is the voice that we give our identity to. Of all these voices, we think, that's me, the one that says I'm not okay. And the toxic emotion that shows up as a result of that narrative is shame. Now, shame is going to get you to do all kinds of things you would never do if you felt good about yourself, confident, like owned who you were, loved yourself. You'll get in relationships, you'll take jobs, you'll do things, you'll give yourself away. And then afterwards, more shame, like, why did I do that to myself? Why do I keep putting myself in those situations? Well, the voice makes you do it. So these last couple, this next one, injustice. An injustice appraisal is going to be made when anything happens that doesn't feel fair. So it can be a very minor thing, somebody cuts you off in traffic, or it can be a big thing. Anger is going to be the result of that one. The last thing is a challenge appraisal, and if there is any healthy way to appraise a lousy situation, this is it. A person who feels like a difficult situation is a challenge, they're going to feel determined. Okay, and good things can come from that, but not always. If it becomes an out of control downward spiral pattern of determination, I'll show you, it doesn't end up in a good place. All right, now notice that the stress happens, it's contextual. You are in a place at a time, something does happen. There is meaning that arises, the subject, the object, and the interaction between the two, and then the emotions arise and biochemistry changes. Every single emotion is going to have its own biochemical signature. Now, we talked about karma, and karma means action. There's another feature of karma. It's said to be extremely hidden. It's an extremely hidden phenomenon, which means the actions that produce the karma that makes us who we are infinite. So I want everyone to get a sense of your own personal karma. So think of your body right now, right? Think of your body. It's made up of between 100 and 300 trillion cells, depending. Now, you can't fathom that number, it's too big, but you can picture one cell. And just do that right now. Picture one cell, and that cell is keeping itself alive. It's reaching out into the extracellular space, it's bringing in oxygen and nutrients, it's running its metabolism, it's making proteins and getting rid of waste. And in every single moment, millions of chemical reactions take place in every single cell. Now, do the math. Millions times 200 trillion, and you get quintillions of actions happening in your mind-body network every single finger snap. Okay, we talked about this before. All of those actions are producing the sum total of who you are. Your experience right now is being produced by all those actions. Now, those actions follow certain patterns. You're not doing it. So fingernails are being made, nobody grows fingernails. Hearts beat by themselves, seeing happens, English is understood. And all of that happens by itself. Okay, good. So now let's say you're conditioned the way you are, and that is the truth. We're all conditioned the way we are. That's why in 12-step they talk about powerlessness. Powerlessness is because we are who we are in this moment. And it doesn't mean that we don't have any choice. We still have a little bit of choice, but if we're not being really mindful and careful about where our attention is going and what it's fixating on, the network is going to focus in the way that it's always focused. So let's say we don't know how to be mindful, and a loss, a major loss does happen. We get stuck in a narrative of loss, and at first we're deeply sad and grieving, but later it turns into depression and we can't get out of it. Or there's a lot of threat one because of traumas in the past, and then anxiety-related conditions. And I have an asterisk there because I just want people to know there's so many different anxiety-related conditions, from on a continuum of insomnia, I'm afraid I'm not going to get to sleep, to PTSD. Threat two and inadequacy often cause addictions, because a person who feels overwhelmed for a really long period of time wants to soothe and medicate that overwhelm, or a person who is feeling super empty inside wants to fill themselves up with people, places, and things. And then anger, that can turn into rage. Now, remember, runaway challenge appraisal, there's a dark side to that too. Determination is on the light side, but it can turn into OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, narcissism, workaholism. That's what happens when a person is just completely fixated and go, 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 and there's no perspective. So do you see that? So the conditions that arise, I call these stress-related conditions, these conditions arise out of contexts. You can't find depression in the brain. Now, I know that there's a brain that's producing a pattern of nerve firing, but it's kind of like a chicken and the egg thing. That person with the depression, that brain also has a mind. Remember the experience? That's causal. And what is happening in that mind that is shifting the brain? We don't know, but even if something is happening in the brain, the mind has influence. And then there's a body, that has influence. And then there's a family, and that has influence. And then there's a society and a world, right? And all of it, the whole thing, is where depression is. It's not found in one location, it's distributed. It's a context-related condition. And addictions are the same way, and every single one of these conditions, and the stuff that we experience, the autoimmune stuff, the dysfunctional relationships, every pattern that keeps making itself isn't found anywhere, it's distributed everywhere. And so that's why the pill won't do it. But awareness can. Becoming more and more aware to the fullness of the flow of all the energy and information, really skillfully tuning into triggers, thoughts, and sensations, and then trying to work out, like with your therapist. Why am I so sensitized? Talk about the story, but also with the deconstructive practice, you also have to deconstruct your story. You can't just story. You have to get out of it. You have to be your own therapist. Here's what happens next. Thought distortions are the result, the distorted patterns of thinking that are producing the lousy outcomes, meaning a thought distortion I want to define as the pattern of making something worse. The pattern of appraising something, and in the appraisal, you make it worse. That's a thought distortion. You're amplifying the negative, and here's how that happens. So the lousy thing happened. It's a stress, the appraisal comes, but then if nobody's watching, the thinking that comes with the appraisal is going to be automatic. And then beliefs are going to develop around those automatic thoughts. I am this person, I am this way, and you guys are that way. Self and world, subject and object, there are beliefs that are made about that construct, about that context. And then we're going to develop our own habit of actions that allow us to cope. And some of those habits of actions are not super skillful. They make things worse. And so then ultimately what we'll be living with is a habitually distorted story inside our head. Made worse by, and this is, the research says this, catastrophizing is thinking of the worst possible outcome and fixating on that. Hypervigilance is you just can't pull your attention away from the narrative. You're just stuck there. Those two categories of thought, patterns of thinking, create the downward spiral. Okay? And so oftentimes we can recognize that in ourselves. It's super easy to recognize it in other people. Okay? Catastrophizing and hypervigilance. All right, so this is the previous slide and this slide are basically summary slides that I hope you're able to connect how systems, dynamics, the self-making of systems connects with this meaning making that we're doing, and how to use meditation now to shift the focus of our attention to begin to alter our reactivity to certain situations. That's what this is all about. Good? All right.